Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing as we are in the middle of the second season now, which is the fall season for severe weather. Doesn't look like a particularly significant or substantial severe weather threat, but this is my target area over the South Plains of Texas into southwestern Texas, down near as far south as the Permian Basin as well. And it is kind of a messy setup, but there will be those ingredients for severe weather, especially along this area here of those easterly winds that could be in position there at the surface near the low levels. That's where there could be a little bit of enhanced bulk shear, just enough to maybe have that severe weather threat and maybe even a transient supercell or two. There is about 25 knots out of the southwest and the mid-levels of the atmosphere overtop those easterlies at about 5 to 10 knots, and that's located over the pink area there. It is possible that there could be a bit of a boundary that sets up where those easterly surface winds meet southeasterly winds off to the south, and that's likely going to be the northern edge of that instability, but I'm not sure how clean that boundary is going to be. There's not much of an elevated mix layer coming in over top with relatively meridional mid and upper level flow, but I do think there is a chance of an isolated severe weather, maybe an isolated supercell or two, and there is a non-zero chance of a tornado. The Storm Prediction Center does have a 2% area out there, but at first glance you can hardly even see the trough within the 500 millibar wind fields there, but it is there in general. Here is that egg-shaped trough that is centered just to the west of the Four Corners through the early afternoon hours, just lumbering along off to the east. And looking outside here in the Colorado foothills, very foggy right now, relatively cool as well in that post-frontal environment. And that cold front is all the way down through the central and southern Texas panhandle, and really ahead of that cold front on the nose of that instability, really minor, relatively subtle bulk shear there, transient supercells at best with something like this. The main jet stream way up north in Canada, another cutoff flow here off in New England, and then you've got this cutoff flow here just lumbering from west to east, and it is going to bring a flash flood threat too across central and northern New Mexico. Flash flood watches are in effect there, but what you really need is that strong flow with an open trough, that strong mid and upper level flow going over the Mexican plateau there. That would bring a mid-level clear slot or an elevated mix layer over the southern plains. It would likely, if you had more of an open trough here, it would excite more of a low-level jet as well across the southern plains, and then you'd be talking about a more substantial severe weather threat. But this is a closed low with weak flow all the way around it, so it is a relatively weak upper-level low, and it is weakening with time too, considering that it's detached from the main jet stream that is way up to the north in Canada. But there is a lot of moisture associated with this system lumbering along to the east, and out ahead of that system, that's where I do expect that severe weather. Southern plains of Texas down into the Permian Basin, possibly some flash flooding as well. But with a closed low like this, it's not a very well-defined open wave. You don't have very strong vorticity convection as well. That's going to lead to a relatively weak low-level jet. And looking at the 850 winds across the southern plains, central and southern plains there, you could see a relatively weak flow at 850 millibars, about a kilometer above the ground here. But despite the relatively weak low-level jet, we could get some high plains type profiles out there, especially across southeastern New Mexico into the South Plains of Texas, maybe down into the Permian Basin. Ahead of that cold front, there could be a little channel of easterly winds, a little bit of cape and instability there as well. But there is a flash flood threat across northern New Mexico. This is the 3-kilometer NAM, showing some scattered areas and maybe an inch or two of precipitation. It looks like the heaviest precipitation, according to the 3-kilometer NAM, is going to be in the San Juans of southwestern Colorado, back toward the Four Corners region, northwestern New Mexico. But the HRRR does show a little bit more substantial precipitation across the flash flood watch area, northern New Mexico. A couple areas there could train with those south to north moving storms. Convection moving south to north could dump even in excess of 2 inches of rain there at certain locations, and that includes the areas of Albuquerque, northern New Mexico, some of those burn scars out there too, near the Philmont Boy Scout Ranch. Certainly could see some debris flows down there. So that's another concern, certainly is the flash flooding out across northern New Mexico. Here is the 3-kilometer NAM forecast cape, and you can see a nice blob of cape that organizes across southwestern Texas, and you really want to target the northwestern periphery of that cape for any wind shear potential there. You really need those surface winds to be out of a due easterly direction beneath those 25-knot southwesterly mid-tropospheric winds. Those easterly winds will boost the bulk shear just above 30 to 40 knots, and that's going to lead to transient supercell structures along the northwestern periphery of that instability axis. And I do think some of that instability, according to the RAP, heads into southeastern New Mexico with those easterlies out near the Carlsbad area, far southeastern New Mexico, out near Monaghan Sandhills as well. That could be a good target. But if that instability and those easterlies are able to pump a little bit of moisture into the southeastern corner of New Mexico, then I think that there could be a chance out there of a Mothership supercell, maybe as well a chance of a tornado or two. This is a forecast 3-kilometer NAM 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity, and you can see that the max 0 to 3 kilometer shear, except for the post-frontal environment. So ignore this blob up here across the central and northern Texas Panhandle. That's post-frontal. That's enhanced by a northerly component to those surface winds. So you want to look for these pockets of shear that are within the warm sector that are co-located with that Cape map that I just showed you. And you can see that along that northwest periphery of the Cape, that's where you get the greatest 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity. And I use a 0 to 3 kilometer layer out here because this is the high plains. This is the Texas Panhandle out here, relatively high elevation. Your 850 millibars is really close to the surface. You're basically looking at a surface wind when you're looking at an 850 millibar chart. Basically between 700 and 850 is your low-level jet. So I like to use a 0 to 3 kilometer layer to really capture where that strongest storm relative helicity will be located. And not surprisingly, it is going to be on that northwestern periphery of the Cape Blob. Here you can see that Cape Blob there. Northwestern periphery has the greatest storm relative helicity in a 0 to 3 kilometer layer. So that's where I think that the greatest tornado potential is going to be located with this setup. And it's not a very high tornado potential. It's a relatively messy setup. You're going to get a lot of storms competing with each other, merging with relatively weak flow aloft, a weak elevated mix layer too, and I think that these storms are going to develop by as early as about 1 p.m. out here. So about 19Z is when these storms are going to develop. And you can see, according to the 3-kilometer NAM, those dew points don't quite make it into southeastern New Mexico. But as I'm going to show you here in a second, according to the RAP model, it does. Those easterlies do bring decent dew points, 60-plus dew points into the southeastern corner of New Mexico. And that's where there is going to be greater 0 to 3 kilometer shear, right in the northwestern periphery of these deeper dew points. But you do have 60s dew points across the South Plains of Texas into the Permian Basin, along that I-20 corridor, west of Midland, out near that southeastern corner of New Mexico. That looks like the best target area for severe weather. And the 3-kilometer NAM tries to initiate storms out there as early as 19Z. So by about 1 p.m., that's when those storms could be initiating out there. You can see that one lone storm down there, South Plains of Texas, down near Levelland there, La Mesa area. So I do think that there is going to be a chance of even an isolated noodle or two. Dominator 4 is still not ready, or I'd probably be down there chasing, or at least working the flash flood potential across northern New Mexico. Let's look a little bit closer. And the 3-kilometer NAM actually matures these storms out a little deeper into the instability and deeper into the moisture, rather than convecting this area in southeastern New Mexico. Doesn't quite get the moisture out there, and this convection that fires at 19Z is going to be what prevents that moisture from getting into southeastern New Mexico, as is being indicated by the RAP. So you may want to target further east out near San Angelo, according to the 3-kilometer NAM. And looking out there, there is slightly better instability that far east, a little bit better dew points. You're deeper into those 60s dew points. Let's quickly look at the 0 to 3 kilometer EHI though. Notice how it's greater. That blob of 0 to 3 kilometer EHI is greatest out near that southeastern corner of New Mexico and across the Permian Basin out near Midland, Odessa area, out toward Monaghan Sandhills State Park. That is behind the convection a little bit, so you probably get some northerly surface winds out there, starting to enhance the 0 to 3 kilometer shear out there. That's good for those Mothership supercells. Not great for tornadoes when you get those northeasterly surface winds, but you can still squeeze out a tornado back in that post-frontal environment with those modified post-frontal environment with those northeasterly surface winds. But this storm that develops in the South Plains of Texas is able to stay a little bit further east along that boundary. Southerly winds, easterlies out ahead of it, and it kind of rides that boundary of easterlies there. So I do think that there is a chance. It does get east, though, of those modest mid and upper level winds, and that's why you get such a trash photograph out there further east, just below my head. Let me see if I can shrink down my head a little bit here. Got a massive bowling ball head. There you can see that photograph just below me. A lot of cape out there, though. Look at all this cape within that layer. Pretty steep low-level lapse rates, 87/63. Surprisingly high-based ahead of a system like this, that closed, moist, upper-level low. Looks like you do have a decent elevated mix layer, surprisingly, over West Texas. Quite a bit of dry air aloft there. But the photograph for that lead storm, not great. And then back behind it, those winds try to shift, surface winds try to shift to a more northeasterly direction, which does inflate that 0 to 3 kilometer EHI a bit. But boy, the 60 dew point barely makes it to that southeastern corner of New Mexico. I would prefer to target more of the high plains environment rather than this lead storm. Stays wet. You can see this little channel of deeper dew points, even upper 60s, and that belt of easterlies out there meeting up with that storm that develops at about 19Z over the south plains of Texas. Let's see, moving forward here, if we get any more convective initiation back behind that. Well, the models still aren't showing a ton of precipitation across northern New Mexico, across that flash flood watch area, but I think that if you get a couple of stationary storms there, weak flow aloft, quite a bit, an abundance of moisture as well, then I think that there is going to be that 1 to 2 to 2.5 inch type rainfall that is sufficient to create flash flooding across northern New Mexico, San Juans of Colorado as well. But boy, look at this by 21Z. Just creates a mess. Basically runs out of the stronger flow there at 500. There's really not a ton of strong flow in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. But it just basically creates a log jam there of storms. A cluster of storms across the southern Texas panhandle with this relatively weak and meridional flow and a west to east oriented boundary. You really need a supercell to move almost due west to east within that belt of easterlies there to really maximize that bulk shear. But with these meridional mid and upper tropospheric winds, you're setting the stage for a pretty messy setup here. Now you need a really clean, nice clean open wave, elevated mix layer coming off the Mexican plateau. Still though, the 3 kilometer NAM does fire a storm back behind the cluster, back behind that log jam. You get a couple of isolated supercells out there across the South Plains and Permian Basin, just off that southeastern corner of New Mexico there. I do think that those surface winds are going to be more of a northeasterly direction out there. But you could get a beautiful Mothership, maybe an isolated noodle out there. You can see these northerlies in that photograph, northeasterly winds in the 0 to 1 kilometer layer. It does bring, though, about some decent 0 to 1 and 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative shear, some streamwise vorticity intake with an northeasterly storm motion at 10 knots. See a lot of meridional flow here in the mid and upper levels. Usually when you get these northerly winds in the lowest kilometer, that creates kind of a slightly elevated storm. You can really see these northeasterly winds there. But that does enhance your 0 to 3 kilometer shear above 200. That sounding had about 224, 0 to 1 kilometer shear. So there is a chance that if some supercells can evolve and develop by about 3 to 4 p.m. out there near that southeastern corner of New Mexico, I think that those might have a little bit better structure. Whereas that lead storm, 19 to 20Z across the South Plains of Texas, could drop some big hailstones there. Maybe have some transient supercell structure before it runs into that log jam on the east side of that stronger mid and upper tropospheric flow, and then you're going to get kind of a clustered out area. Pretty good moisture across central Oklahoma. I've seen some video of some hail producers up there this morning already. So some heavy rain up in Oklahoma. I think there's going to be some heavy rain this weekend too across the southern plains that could rain out that Kansas City Oklahoma game, or at least encourage an under type of a score out there. So you can see that slight risk across the south plains of Texas into the Permian Basin. Here is the RAP analysis. So you've got these northerly winds with that cold front through the Texas Panhandle. They turn into easterlies across the high plains of New Mexico. Orographic lift there along the ridges, the mountains there. San Cristos in northern New Mexico definitely could squeeze out a little bit of moisture there. But really you want to look ahead of that cold front, southerly winds, and look for a belt of easterlies that could mature down here. Here you can see some of the rain over central Oklahoma. causing even a little bit of hail up there, some elevated cape, mid-level cape up there, mid-level steep lapse rates as well, elevated over shallow stable air at the surface. And you can start to see this blob of even 3,000 cape developing ahead of that front. Winds just on the cold side of that front, starting to shift out of an easterly direction. Northeasterly surface winds there. And still those easterly winds by about 21Z. But the wrap also shows this kind of messy evolution of storms. You get this cluster of storms here over West Texas, southeastern, the Texas Hill Country out there with that lead storm that develops at about 19Z over the southern Texas Panhandle, pushes off to the east. But then you get destabilization back behind it. That's what the wrap is showing. Those easterly winds, even up to 4,000 cape, bleeding into southeastern New Mexico. So if you can get a storm, an isolated supercell out there across the southeastern corner of New Mexico, southern Texas Panhandle there within that belt of easterlies, rapid maintenance of cape out there with those easterlies in that blob of 4,000 cape back behind it. But it all depends on if you can maintain those easterly surface winds there behind this lead cluster of storms. That's what is all of this is going to depend upon. You get about 100 effective storm relative helicity back behind that lead cluster. 100, 125 storm relative helicity, so not incredible wind shear. Slow storm motions. Training storms there over the northern mountains of New Mexico and the San Juans. Might see more flash flood warnings out of the San Juans, where the short range models are showing a lot more precipitation up in the San Juans, just on the Colorado side rather than northern New Mexico. But there you can see about 100 to 125 effective storm relative felicities being indicated by the WRAP model here, and just really meridional flow. But the 500 millibar flow does increase with time, shifts a little more southwesterly between about 19Z, 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. there. And it does look like there could be development of a couple renegade supercells. Maybe I see two different rounds. I see storms developing at about 19Z across the South Plains of Texas, maturing, probably developing a severe thunderstorm warning. A little bit elevated, but eventually that, by about 21Z, that moves into the Texas Hill Country out of that stronger low-level flow, and then it moves into a log jam, and that's when you get more of a cluster. You lose those supercell storms. And then I think that behind that, you could get around to the southeastern corner of New Mexico and into the far southwestern corner, down near Monaghan Sandhills. There could be development back behind some of those lead storms out there. So let's take a look and see what the HRRR shows. It doesn't do a very good job here on the southern high plains. Likely overmixes a lot of these dew points still somehow. And basically the 0 to 3 kilometer EHIs are almost non-existent. Not a lot of cape out there. And look what it does out here. What a travesty. Southeastern New Mexico, it mixes out those dew points even ahead of a very moist, egg-shaped upper level low like this. Mixes them out into the 40s. And basically is really aggressive with that front. It develops a storm here over the southern plains, South Plains of Texas down into the Permian Basin, pushes east into these meager dew points. So what a difference these short-range models are showing. Let's just see, we'll just look at composite reflectivity then, see if this HRRR probably agrees with the WRAP and the 3 kilometer NAM, likely right for the wrong reasons, and it does. So at 19Z, it does initiate a cluster of storms down here over the South Plains of Texas, right in the northwestern periphery of that instability, but it's a cluster, messy cluster out there, hardly any supercells. That's the initial mode that we saw. And now we want to watch for redevelopment back here out toward the southeastern corner of New Mexico, back toward Monaghan Sandhills, maybe even the Pecos Valley could get a transient supercell or two down there with those southeasterly winds beneath about 25 knots at 500. But it just likes to cluster them out near that log jam. Doesn't allow that moisture to advect into the southeastern corner of New Mexico. And look at this mess here that develops across the Permian Basin. A lot of rainfall down there. Potentially some flash flooding. Big rainmaker here with this system, so you may even want to extend those flash flood advisories and watches out across the South Plains of Texas, because this is by 7, 8 p.m. tonight. Big time rainfall down there across the South Plains of Texas, everybody. So boy, even if my Dominator 4 was ready, I'm not sure I'd even head down to the southern plains of Texas. I'd probably end up working these burn scars out here for a debris flow or a flash flood warning. I saw that I-70 was closed for a time yesterday with a flash flood warning that was issued for Glenwood Canyon. Not sure if that ended up cutting loose and producing a debris flow or not, but they did shut I-70 as a precaution yesterday. Anytime there's rainfall on that burn scar, they'll end up closing I-70 just for the risk of those debris flows that could come down and impact I-70 motorists along it as well. So that's what we're looking at here. I could show you some of these flash flood advisories as well. Down there, there's the slight risk. It looks like there's already a mesoscale discussion anticipating the early development of severe weather. You got the dry line here over the Pecos Valley. You do have the cold front. That's going to become a stationary front through the afternoon with those easterly winds shifting back behind it. And you've already got a couple of storms here developing near that southeastern corner of New Mexico, and those are likely going to mature and prevent further moisture advection into the southeastern corner of New Mexico. But you've already got a 60 dew point there through Monaghan, Sandhills State Park, and increasing strong storm development as early as 1 to 3 p.m. Storm Prediction Center is in agreement with us here. Beneath about 20 to generally weak shear, 20 to 40 knot southwesterly flow in the 500 to 300 millibar layer. It's not rocket science. Meteorology is easy. Just look for those ingredients. There is a flash flood watch that is in effect. And this is down in New Mexico here. So we got the burn scar matrix. So today there is a high risk of flooding across these burn scars. The recent one here, the Johnson fire in 2021. Friday, still a decent burn scar threat for those debris flows, but universally north and south. Ute Park in 2018. That's near the Philmont Boy Scout Ranch. Sardinas Canyon 2018. The Luna fire 2020. So you got to keep an eye off these burn scars. It doesn't take as much rain to generate a flash flood off of those burn scars. I should be heading down to New Mexico probably and working some of these burn scars out there. Maybe I'll head down tomorrow and chase some of these. And we are considering a Q&A. Mike Tice and I tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm trying to figure out how to splice another person in to the to my live stream, and I know I can do that on Facebook. If I can't figure it out, then I might just have to do the Q&A by myself. But we're going to be answering questions on Storm Rising, which is set to premiere this Sunday, October 3rd, National Geographic Television, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Really appreciate your support, spreading the word about this show. Most of it's self-promotion. Usually networks don't promote these new shows until they get decent ratings. So here you can see the general expected precipitation, and more than enough to generate debris flows around those burn scars. 1 inch and an inch and a half. Sandia Peak, those mountains to the northeast of Albuquerque. I've summited Sandia Peak out there. But boy, hopefully we can get this stagnant upper level low out before the Balloon Festival coming up, which I think is coming up next week. Maybe this weekend the Balloon Fest is coming. But definitely some precipitation out there expected across northern New Mexico. We've already looked at the model forecast for that. If you believe the HRRR, it shows the potential for a little bit more precipitation. 3 kilometer NAM, though, shows the greater totals up into the San Juans of southern Colorado. So definitely this upper level low is creating for some moody fall color scenes out there. I've seen the word moody used a lot for fall colors posts from leaf peepers out there with the clouds, but I like to have the sun just illuminating the bright colors, bright blue sky above. That's usually what I prefer for these storms. So there you have it. I hope you guys enjoy my weather reports. I do think that there is an isolated chance of severe weather. It is pretty low end there across the Permian Basin, that I-20 corridor, Midland, Odessa, toward the southeastern corner of New Mexico. Some of those storms are already starting to develop across the southeastern corner of New Mexico. Should probably pull up the radar here, take a look at that really quick. And then I'm going to go get some breakfast, figure out my day. Probably do some more lives today. It's kind of cool weather outside, so We've already got a severe thunderstorm warning down near Andrews, folks, so it is developing much earlier, a couple hours earlier than we even anticipated. So let me show you this radar image of this blob over Andrews. Pull up some radar here, right in our target area. It is developing a little bit earlier, which probably is going to prevent a tornado threat. I think that there's just going to be blobs of convection developing throughout the day. But there's the first severe thunderstorm warning. It includes Andrews, Texas there. An elevated storm, kind of a blob here to the northwest of Midland. Here you can see the cold front. You can definitely see it here. It just came through the Lamesa area. Probably going to prevent at least your tornado threat there, but anywhere to the south of this front where it's able to especially shift into a more east-west boundary with those surface easterly winds, but that's not expected to happen until later today. So I expect a MCS to form out here, evolve off to the east, and likely prevent that moisture, deeper moisture transport into New Mexico, even though you can kind of see these southeasterlies coming into the Jal area out of Kermit. Probably bringing some of those 60 dew points out there. A little bit of early convection into southeastern New Mexico as well. But this is the blob of convection just to the north of Andrews. It does look like that front has stalled out. Oh, it's still blasting to the south. Looks like it's almost in the Midland area already. Some kind of a gravity wave there, a deeper front that this thing is forming on. I do believe that the lead front looks like it's all the way down to the I-20 corridor as well. So elevated convection here, minimal tornado threat, enhanced 0 to 3 kilometer SRH, but it is over a shallow stable layer here. Clusters of these severe storms here should develop right along this cold front. You can see more fire hose of convection here developing down near the Midland area, streaming into this. So basically we are witnessing the development of an MCS over West Texas right before our eyes. Expecting to see some flash flood warnings too later on this afternoon across the Albuquerque area. A little bit of convection starting to develop over the mountains already out there. So I do think that the flash flood watch area is likely to convect 1 to 2 inches of precipitation out there. Seem very likely. But we are watching the Permian Basin today for a severe weather threat. Might as well get that severe thunderstorm watch out if we're going to issue it, even though it is late morning. It's only 11:15 out there in the morning. You're already showing the development of severe weather relatively earlier than the 19Z time frame that the 0 to 3 kilometer NAM and HRRR were going to show. So I think that this is going to evolve. You can see a dry line out here off to the west as well. Looks like the dry line's working its way through the Pecos Valley. Radar reflectivity is such a great tool to identify these surface boundaries. And it does look like that dry line is mixing a little bit east, very slowly to the east. Once that dry line mixes east, so I do think it could slosh back to the west again with that slow moving upper level low. But really I want to watch this area by afternoon behind this developing complex of storms is going to slide into the Texas Hill Country maybe by 2 to 3 p.m. With the increase in those southwesterly 500 millibar winds. But right now, you've got very meridional flow here. Kind of surprised they put out that 2% risk. Maybe the Southern Plains bias out there from the Storm Prediction Center. But I do think that there is definitely a threat of some flash flooding, maybe some hail as well, some low-end severe weather. Already a severe thunderstorm warning out there for 60-mile-an-hour winds, 1-inch diameter hail, but it does expire in about 2 minutes. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to my weather report. There's the target area. I'm going to drive down to the Subaru dealership, try to squeeze them a little bit, see if I can hustle the completion of Dominator 4 so that I can get back into storm chasing mode, mount the Dominator weather station on the roof, which is going to be shipped to me here shortly, and the new surginators that Mark is fixing as well. And I've got a flex tape and flex seal the whole entire Dominator 4. That's for the flex tape video that I'm doing coming up here next. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to my weather report this morning. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Never stop chasing.